Dr. Mark Changizi here with your Science Moment. Today I'm going to talk about perception and auditory perceptions and sort of perceptual completion, sometimes called amodal completion. And you're seeing a good example of this just right now. You certainly don't perceive me to be in parts, right? I'm a whole. I just happen to have an occlusion in part of my body, and these occlusions can vary over time, and there's nothing particularly jarring or anything with perceptually when you're seeing these kinds of things. They happen all the time. Someone might be walking along and you just briefly lose sight of them, but you still have a perceived whole. And we talked about this before. Even if you're seeing me whole, you don't see the back of my head, but you still perceive there to be a back of my head rather than, let's say, a concave place, in the back where my brain would be, right? You perceive all of these things that you can't see. You nevertheless perceive that you can't directly see. You nevertheless have a perception. Your representation includes all of these things. Now, I wanted to mention, I was talking about the most fundamental reason why masking is not a good idea, why those face coverings aren't a good idea. And that was because it covers your face. I don't know if you recall that. Now, the fun thing about that is a lot of people watch that video and they're just like, my gosh, you're saying it. And actually, I wasn't. Every single occurrence of of me saying f***ing, actually, I deleted out the part where it's the F-U-C-K part. But most people hear it, right? You actually hear me say f***ing even though I didn't actually say it. And so what's the similarity between this kind of completion, visual completion of me behind this, to the auditory completion of a missing piece of words, right? And it's the same thing, because just like during actual movement, something might have partially occluded me for some period of time, in this case a long period of time, but might be partial, short period of time, and I don't lose the perception of you. You don't lose the perception of me just because I go out of sight just for that period. The perception is still there. It's just perceived as behind something. Well, the same thing happens if I'm just saying something. I'm saying 10, 9, 8, 7, 5, 4. Some of those words might have been completely missing, or at least over the volume was such that it was inaudible because something else was so loud. And sometimes maybe there's just some actual occlusion where my voice reflected back to me mostly, and so it's mostly inaudible to you relative to the other kinds of sounds around you. In which case, that's no problem. You still perceive and have a perceptual whole despite missing the parts. Whether it's auditory perception or visual perception, you perceive the whole despite there being auditory occlusions or visual occlusions. And that was your Science Moment. If you're interested in these sorts of things, my earlier book, my second book, Vision Revolution, is about the brilliant design of our visual system, including why we see in color, why our eyes face forward, how we came to have writing, why we see illusions, things along these lines. Well, get yourself a copy, and that was your Science Moment.